Hello. First of all, nice to meet you all. I finally decided to bring you my videos in a different format. It took way too long to make it all work because it's all new to me and it's far from perfect. I really wanted to get this video out this week because I've made you guys wait long enough, but I'll continue to tweak my small recording space to improve my videos. So thank you for waiting so patiently. As some of you may already know, I started this channel in mid-January of 2023 and you've stuck with me up to this point. Many of you leave comments to all my videos that I feel like I already know you. I hope you continue to enjoy what I bring, and for those of you who are new, welcome. I share creepy stories from all across Japan, so if that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing to my channel. Today's special episode is part 1 of 40 disgusting death row inmates that died in jail before their execution. The list is in no particular order, and some are more in-depth than others depending on how much information I was able to find. Let me know in the comments how many of these cases you've heard of before. Alright, enough from me. Let's get started. Details of gruesome cases will be discussed from here on out. Viewer discretion is advised. Yuji Kubota. In October 1988, Kubota stabbed and killed a married couple to avoid being discovered that he had lied on an insurance contract. He stabbed them in the neck and other parts of their bodies with a screwdriver and a kitchen knife in their home in Kitami City, Hokkaido Prefecture. The Kushiro District Court Kitami branch handed down the death sentence in March 2004, and the Sapporo High Court's ruling in December 2005 upheld the verdict. The Supreme Court dismissed the appeal in December 2009 and the sentence was finalized. According to Sapporo Prison, Kubota's cognitive function had been declining since mid-June of 2023. He suffered from diabetic coma and mixed dementia, and in July he was admitted to Sapporo Prison, which has a well-equipped medical system. On September 23rd, a drop in his blood oxygen level was observed shortly after 7 a.m., and at 7:26 a.m. the doctor on duty confirmed his death from aspiration pneumonia. He was 78 years old. Number 2. Miyuki Ueda. The case came to light in 2009 when one after another, men who had relationships with Ueda began to die under mysterious circumstances. She was a single mother with 5 children and had been divorced twice. She lived in a tiny one-room apartment that was about 22 square meters with a monthly rent of 25,000 yen or about $160. At the time of her arrest, the apartment was in deplorable conditions with mountains of trash everywhere. She was about 150 centimeters tall, just shy of 5 feet, and weighed over 70 kilos or 154 pounds. She worked in a hostess bar in Tottori City that catered to voluptuous women. She was very skilled at seduction techniques and approached lonely men who were also divorced. After sitting down next to them, she would whisper words and ask to live together and would quickly become physically intimate. From there, she asked for large sums of money by lying to them about how her mother was in the hospital and she needed financial help. A total of 6 men that were involved with her died, but there were insufficient evidence for 4 of them. Their official causes of death were determined to either be from suicide or an accident or from an underlying illness. She was charged, however, for the other 2 murders of a truck driver and an electrician. In order to avoid paying back her debts, she gave them sleeping pills and drowned them in the Sea of Japan and a river, respectively. Ueda claimed her innocence, but in August of 2017, she was sentenced to death. She was receiving medication for multiple illnesses, including high blood pressure and angina. On January 14, 2023, she choked and collapsed during dinner and staff removed the food from her throat, but she lost consciousness. She was taken to a hospital, but death was confirmed at 6:57 p.m., aged 49. Cause of death, suffocation. What became her last supper consisted of 6 dishes, white rice, yakisoba noodles, rolled egg, fried ham and potato salad, spaghetti salad, and fish balls. I'm sorry, but what? These bloody inmates are eating better and healthier meals than some hardworking citizens of the country. Not to mention the medication she was on. Who's paying for that crap? She didn't deserve to be so well taken care of, in my opinion. I know, you can call me cold-hearted. Minoru Iwamori. The transportation company that Iwamori was running went bankrupt. On February 21, 2007, he used a blunt object he had brought with him to the home of a man he knew to kill him and his wife and stole a pathetic 10,000 yen in cash, which is about $64 in today's horrible Japanese yen rate. Back then, it was probably closer to about $80. In 2019, he was first sentenced to life in prison, but it was upgraded to the death penalty by the Tokyo High Court and was upheld by the Supreme Court. According to the Ministry of Justice, he was admitted to the detention house's hospital ward in early December of 2021 due to muscle weakness and difficulty walking. His blood tests showed an inflammatory reaction and began receiving antibiotics to treat heart arrhythmia, but his condition worsened and died from heart failure at 11:58 p.m. on the 11th, aged 76. Kazutoshi Takahashi. Kazutoshi visited the office of a real estate and financial business owner with the promise of borrowing about 12 million yen, hit the man in the head with a crowbar, and stabbed him in the chest and back with a screwdriver, killing him. When he tried to run away after stealing the money, he ran into the man's wife, who he beat to death. In court, he admitted to stealing the money, but said that the couple were already dead when he got there. However, upon learning that his business proposal was a sham and having set up a meeting for him to receive the money for investment purposes, he was found guilty of the crime. Around May 2021, Takahashi had difficulty eating on his own due to muscle weakness. He then developed aspiration pneumonia and began receiving treatment in the hospital ward. His condition stabilized for a while but worsened on the night of October 7th. He was confirmed dead at around 12:20 a.m. on the following day, aged 87. Can I just cut in here again and say something? Why are these people kept in jail for so long until their death sentences are carried out? I don't really know how much it costs the government to care for them in jail, but isn't it much cheaper for the country as a whole if these inmates' sentences were carried out sooner rather than later? He was in jail for 33 long years. I mean, come on. Am I missing something? Yoshihiro Takahashi. Yoshihiro, originally from Hiroshima Prefecture, ran a successful real estate company in Meguro City, Tokyo during the bubble era. He was well off and was on friendly terms with several professional baseball players from the Giants and also sponsored a former Oriental Pacific boxing champion. He also worked as a sponsor for celebrities and athletes. However, with the collapse of the bubble economy, the company's management stalled and its debts rose to the hundreds of millions. As a result, he borrowed about 200 million yen, close to $2 million from a gang boss, but he found himself unable to repay the loan every month. At that time, he set his sights on a doctor who had made a profit of 1.2 billion yen, close to $12 million in real estate sales, and planned a robbery and murder. Takahashi had previously acted as an intermediary when the doctor bought and sold land. The plan was simple and reckless. He and 3 of his subordinates carried out the crime with the intention of stealing hundreds of millions of yen, but all they got was a few million yen. He then buried them alive, suffocating them to death. On May 29, 1996, the Kanagawa Prefectural Police arrested Kasai, one of the men involved, on suspicion of violating the investment law for lending money at interest rates that exceeded the legal limit. During the interrogation, Kasai stated that he had buried 2 people in a forest in Tochigi Prefecture. In response, the Kanagawa Prefectural Police conducted a search and discovered the skeletal remains of the couple on June 13th. The next day, the four were arrested on suspicion of robbery and murder, among other offenses. This was 4 years after the murders. Yoshihiro, the mastermind, was sentenced to death on September 20th, 2005. He complained of chest pain on February 1st, 2021, was diagnosed with acute coronary syndrome at a medical institution. Because he refused to have a catheter inserted, he was treated with oral medication in the detention center's hospital ward, but he died at 12:12 p.m. 2 days later on February 3rd, aged 71. Hiroshi Nozaki. Hiroshi was a single middle-aged man who liked to frequent Filipino pubs. The first murder. Elder Longakit Yoneda, 27 years old. In 1999, Hiroshi used his futon to suffocate and kill 27-year-old Elder Longakit Yoneda. His motive for the crime was that she was acting cold towards him even though he was doting on her and taking her to and from work. By early May, he had dismembered her at the apartment and dumped the parts in various places around Yokohama City. In September, he was arrested on suspicion of embezzlement for continuing to use a rental car for 4 months without paying the fee. During the investigation, it was discovered that he had been dating Elder, who'd been missing. Finely chopped human bones were found inside the car, and the police questioned Hiroshi. He confessed and said, "When I took her to my house, I woke up in the morning to find her dead. I dismembered the body and threw it away for funeral purposes." When they investigated his home in Tokyo, Elder's teeth were found. He was then rearrested on suspicion of desecrating and abandoning a corpse, but no other parts of Elder were found. Since he also denied murdering her, the circumstances of Elder's death remained unexplained, and the Saitama Prefectural Police were forced to give up on the murder charge. Almost a year later, on April 14, 2000, he was sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison, although prosecutors had asked 5 years for embezzlement and mutilation and abandonment of a corpse. He was released on July 5, 2003, when his sentence expired. Second murder. Kami Osawa Honeyfoot Latilia, 22 years old. 4 years after his release, in September of 2007, Hiroshi, then 49 years old, took a liking to Kami Osawa Honeyfoot Latilia, 22 years old, a hostess at a Filipino pub in Ueno, and began frequenting the establishment and driving her to and from work. Latilia lived with her young son from a previous relationship and a friend. Hiroshi sympathized with her, seeing her struggles, such as leaving her son with a friend's relatives while she was at work because she didn't have a good relationship with her mother. He liked her appearance, and he bought her clothes and toys for her son to attract her attention. Around the beginning of November, Latilia started looking for a place for her son and 2 cousins to live together, and Hiroshi helped her. At that time, Latilia proposed to him that he live with her on the condition that he pay part of the rent, deposit, and key money. Hiroshi used the money he got from selling his car to fund the move, and in late December, Latilia and her 2 cousins, a total of 4 people, began living together in an apartment in Odaiba. Later, their older brother also joined, making it 5 people. Around this time, Latilia began working in a pub in Roppongi to increase her income. After they started living together, Hiroshi took them to and from work, did the housework, and looked after their children, but he soon started to fall behind on his rent. This led to constant arguments with Latilia. On the evening of April 3, 2008, Hiroshi called out to her just as she was leaving for work, but she ignored him. This made him angry, and he strangled her to death. The crime took place in their rental apartment in Odaiba. He dismissed her just as he had done with Elder years before. However, at around 8 p.m., Latilia's cousin, worried about her when she didn't come to work, came into the room to check on her. The cousin was instantly suspicious when she smelled the distinct smell of blood as she entered the front door. When she walked into the living room, Hiroshi appeared holding parts of Latilia's body in his arms. Horrified and fearing for her life, the cousin quickly ran out of the room and called the police, and thus the crime was discovered in an instant. At around 10 p.m., investigators arrived and found parts of the body in a paper bag. He had apparently used the spin-dry function of the washing machine to drain the blood from her discarded body parts. On the night of April 6th, Hiroshi attempted to suicide by slashing his wrists on the street in Kawaguchi, Saitama, but failed. Since his injuries were minor, he called the paramedics himself. He then handed a note to the emergency personnel who arrived with the location of a coin locker. When the location was searched, parts of Latilia's body were found in a suitcase, and he was arrested on suspicion of mutilating a corpse. On April 11th, based on Hiroshi's statement, the investigators discovered her head and other parts of her body in a canal near the scene. On April 26th, more parts were found in a domestic wastewater treatment tank on the site of a former hotel in Nasu Town, Tochigi Prefecture. 2 days later, he was rearrested on suspicion of murdering Latilia. The Metropolitan Police Department then questioned him about Elda, the victim of the first murder case. He confessed that he had dumped Elda's body in a canal in Yokohama. In June, a search of a canal in the Yokohama port revealed numerous bone fragments at the bottom of the canal. DNA testing revealed that the bones did not belong to Elda. However, he was rearrested on suspicion of Elda's murder, citing consistency in Nozaki's statements. The first trial verdict avoided the death penalty. On December 16, 2009, the presiding judge sentenced Hiroshi to life imprisonment plus 14 years. Regarding the 1999 murder of Elda, the presiding judge rejected the defense's claim of innocence, stating, "The confession was specific and there was supporting evidence such as human bones found in Hiroshi's car." Regarding the motive for both crimes, the judge determined that Hiroshi believed that he was being used by a woman he was dating, and this caused him to hate her. He also stated, "The crimes were cold-blooded and brutal, and the criminal responsibility is serious. The death penalty is understandable." In the 2008 case, the prosecution sentenced him to life imprisonment, whereas the prosecution had requested the death penalty. In court, Nozaki stated that he was appealing because he was unhappy that he was not sentenced to death. He said, "I thought I would be sentenced to death, so it was a surprise. In the first trial, I tried to change my statements in court and make an effort to get the death penalty." If this was indeed his true intention, his wish would come true. On October 8, 2010, the Tokyo High Court overturned the first trial ruling and sentenced him to death. The presiding judge stated that Hiroshi's confession was done to gain self-satisfaction and cannot be evaluated as an attitude of sincerely facing up to his crime, and that the argument that Hiroshi's remorse and possibility of reform are not enough to avoid the death penalty can be accepted. Regarding the 2008 incident, he pointed out that the murder, mutilation of the body, and abandonment should be evaluated as a series of acts. The trial judge's judgment was extremely lenient in lightening the fact that he committed another crime 5 years and 8 months after his parole. He was found to have a strong criminal tendency and was extremely antisocial. Compared to other death penalty cases, the only option is to impose the death penalty, both in terms of the balance of punishment and crime prevention, the judge said. Hiroshi appealed again on December 14, 2012, this time wanting the death penalty to be taken off the table. However, the judge pointed out that there is no room for leniency in the motive, and the manner of the series of crimes was extremely heinous. Despite being given the opportunity to reflect and repent while serving time for the crimes of mutilating and abandoning a corpse, he committed a similar crime. His criminal responsibility is extremely grave, and the death penalty was upheld. Final verdict: 14 years in prison for the murder of Elda in 1999. Death penalty for the murder of Latilia in 2008. In Japan, heavier sentences are carried out first, so in this case the death penalty takes precedence, and the 14-year sentence will not be carried out. Hiroshi had been undergoing dialysis since December 2018 due to his deteriorating kidney function. In early November 2020, a catheter was inserted as his blood flow became sluggish. In December, he began refusing antibiotic treatment and dialysis, and the morning after not undergoing dialysis on December 12th, he complained of shortness of breath. He was found unconscious around 11 p.m. on the same day and was confirmed dead at 12:42 a.m. on the 13th, aged 61. Wasaburo Takada. From 1972 to 1974, Wasaburo killed a total of 3 people. He first cooperated with a real estate agent to kill a farmer. Afterwards, fearing that he would be found out, he also killed the real estate agent and stole 200,000 yen from his bank account. The following year, he killed a male acquaintance and stole 3.2 million yen from his account. In February 1999, he was handed the death sentence. On the morning of October 16, 2020, a staff member found him breathing with difficulty. He was given oxygen, but his condition suddenly worsened around 11:10 p.m. and he died at 12:45 a.m. the following day, aged 88. Yoshihiro Asa. By 1994, Yoshihiro had established Asa Kikaku in Yamanashi Prefecture, where he recruited homeless people from Tokyo and Osaka, housed them in dormitories, and began a temporary staffing business that dispatched them to construction sites in Yamanashi Prefecture as laborers. Although temporary staffing sounds good, Asa Kikaku's method was illegal. He recruited workers for a daily wage of 8,000 yen or $78, but illegally deducted 7,000 yen or $68 for dormitory fees and food, leaving them with only 1,000 yen, which is less than $10 for a day's work. Sometimes they were not even paid that 1,000 yen, so no matter how hard they worked, they couldn't save enough money for transportation to leave. There was therefore a constant stream of workers fleeing to nearby houses for help. The dormitories were also harsh, with 4 people crammed into 9 square meter rooms. In March of 1997, one of the hired workers started a commotion in the dormitory holding a knife. Yoshihiro, then 47 years old, was afraid that if the commotion got bigger, it would lead to police involvement and would hinder work. He began to lecture the worker, but the worker continued to wield his knife and refused to quieten down. Yoshihiro couldn't tolerate that kind of attitude and began hitting him repeatedly with a wooden sword. Another employee who was made to take care of him after the fact noted that he had about 8 swollen wounds on the front of his body and about 5 on his back. He was in such a bad state that he could only crawl to get to the toilet and died 4 days after the attack. The cause of death was later determined to be bronchopneumonia caused by pulmonary crushing. Yoshihiro sealed the body in a blue tarp and hid it for a long time, and he and some others negotiated to hide the death from the other workers. The body was then packed in a plastic storage box and buried with heavy machinery. 3 years later, on May 14, 2000, 3 workers employed by the company caused a hit-and-run accident. After drinking alcohol in a campsite in Tsuru City, Yamanashi Prefecture, which was managed by Yoshihiro, the 3 workers drove to their dormitory. On the way, they stopped at a liquor store and crashed into the store's car, causing property damage. The 3 workers left the store, but the store owner later called the office to complain, saying that he would report the incident to the police. This brought the accident to Yoshihiro's attention, then 50 years old. Yoshihiro was extremely angry. He called on his 2 friends who were members of a gang to help take care of the matter. They beat the 3 workers ruthlessly. 2 of them managed to run back to the dorm, but one of the gang members chased them and stabbed one of the men with a knife. But that wasn't enough for Yoshihiro. He needed to teach them a lesson. At around 5 p.m., he tied the hands and feet of the stabbed man, the wrists of the other who tried to run away, and drove them back to the campsite. At around 7 p.m., he strangled both of them to death. As for the third worker, they tied his wrists behind his back with a rope and kept him captive, with guards taking turns watching over him. The man eventually found an opportunity to escape but was found on the street and taken back to the office. Yoshihiro then showed him an imitation sword and threatened him, saying, "If you run away again, I'll smash your head with this." He tied his hands and feet and held him captive for a further 5 hours. He was spared from death because he didn't take a rebellious attitude like the two who were killed. Yet another 3 years later, in June 2003, a fire broke out in the dorms, leaving 4 people with minor injuries, and the company went bankrupt in August. The campsite which the company operated was also closed. After that, rumors began to circulate in the local area from around July that several workers had gone missing. Flyers were posted to nearby houses saying that a body was buried at the campsite. When this rumor reached one of the former employees, he became worried. He worked as a heavy equipment operator and went to the police station in August and testified as follows, saying, "There's something I want to tell you. Around May 2000, I was instructed by President Asa to come to the campsite. Heavy machinery was waiting for me there, and the executive at the site instructed me to dig 2 holes and bury a box in each of them." The police deemed this testimony specific and credible and began a search on August 6th with the former employee present. As a result, by the next day, 3 bodies were found in the exact location as described in the testimony. On September 26th, former President Yoshihiro Asa was arrested along with 2 other employees on suspicion of embezzling approximately 1 million yen or $9,000 in insurance money for an employee's traffic accident. Double that was paid in insurance money, but Yoshihiro instructed the other 2 to withdraw almost the entire amount from a bank account and took it for himself. On December 5th, Yoshihiro was rearrested on suspicion of injury resulting in death, and 2 months later, he and 2 male employees were rearrested once again on suspicion of murder. Defendant Yoshihiro Asa admitted to involvement at the time of his arrest, but at the trial, he changed his mind and claimed innocence. Yoshihiro admitted to confining the 2 workers in his office in the murder case. However, he claimed innocence to the murders, saying that he only told them to treat their injuries at the campsite, and the killer was an acquaintance, a former gang boss who has since died. In his final statement, he said, "I never went to the campsite. I am innocent and falsely accused." On October 11, 2006, the Kofu District Court sentenced Yoshihiro to death. On January 14, 2020, Yoshihiro complained of difficulty breathing and was diagnosed with pneumothorax. He was hospitalized for 3 days from February 3rd, and after being discharged, he was treated for interstitial pneumonia in the detention house's ward. His pulse dropped around 7:10 a.m. on February 11th, and he was confirmed dead at 8:30 a.m., aged 70. Hajime Kazama. A husband and wife duo, aged 53 and 37 at the time respectively, were arrested and sentenced to death for the murder of 4 of their customers. The pair owned a pet shop called African Kennel and were certified breeders of Alaskan Malamutes. They had racked up a huge amount of debt, and in order to lessen that burden, they sold their dogs at exorbitant prices, promising their customers that if the dogs ever had pups, they would buy the pups from them at high prices. However, when they brought the pups in, the owners would come up with all sorts of excuses and pay much less than what was promised to them initially. This is an example of the type of business they conducted, and they soon began to have trouble with their customers. From a vet they knew, they got their hands on strychnine, a substance used to put down dogs, and killed 4 of their patrons. They used their employee's house to dismember the bodies and burn everything down to ashes in a steel drum. They threw away the remains in the mountains and rivers along Gunma Prefecture, and thus this multiple homicide case is well known for a case that has no bodies. On June 5, 2009, the Supreme Court sentenced Hajime and his wife to death. Hajime suffered a heart attack in the detention center and was rushed to an outside hospital. After being discharged, he was treated for heart failure and hypertension in the detention center, but died of multiple organ failure on the morning of March 27, 2017, aged 75. Tetsuo Odajima. Case 1. Around 3 p.m. on August 5, 2002, Tetsuo, then 59, and Katsumi Morita, then 51, were in front of a luxurious house. The house was the home of Mabuchi Motor Company Limited CEO Yuji Mabuchi, located in Matsudo City, Chiba Prefecture. It's a company that specializes in small motors and is a major electrical equipment manufacturer with the largest share of the global market for iron core motors. Their main products are industrial motors, but they are also known for their use in toys such as electric toy cars. The two men rang the doorbell pretending to be delivery men and forced President Mabuchi's eldest daughter, Yuka, then 40, to open the door. They pushed their way into the house and threatened Yuka and her mother, Etsuko, then 66, with knives and tied both of their wrists with a necktie. They put duct tape over their mouths and over Yuka's eyes to prevent them from resisting. After ransacking their house, they stole hundreds of thousands of yen in cash, 5 foreign luxury watches, 4 diamond rings, and 5 precious metals, and other items worth about 9.66 million yen, or close to $80,000 with 2002 exchange rates. Tetsuo then strangled the daughter, Yuka, to death in her parents' bedroom upstairs, while Katsumi strangled Mabuchi's wife, Etsuko, in the living room downstairs. After killing the two, they poured mixed gasoline where the bodies lay at around 3:30 p.m. and set them on fire with a lighter. The fire burned about 170 square meters in total. They then left through the back door and fled in a car. Tetsuo sold the jewelry to a jeweler in Tokyo under a false name, and on August 20th, the two went to the Philippines. Tetsuo and Katsumi returned from the Philippines around September 2002, about a month after the previous murders. They didn't get as much money as they had hoped from Mabuchi's residence, and they quickly squandered it all on living expenses, travel, women, pachinko, etc. So, after they returned, the two lived together in Katsumi's apartment. For a while, they continued to commit burglaries. Eventually, Katsumi figured out that it would be better to break into the house of a wealthy person and steal a lot of money, and started urging Tetsuo to target a wealthy person again. Case 2. They then decided to target a dentist and carried out the attack at the man's residence on September 24, 2002. Tetsuo stabbed the man in the chest and Katsuo strangled him to death after the fact. They stole a total of 350,000 yen, about $2,800. They had originally planned to kill the entire family, but luckily his wife and his son, who was an internal medicine doctor, were away on a trip. Case 3. Tetsuo was impressed with how busy a gift certificate shop was when he went to it one day. It was a long-established shop in Chiyoda Ward, Tokyo, and the two decided to make it their next target. On November 21st, the two took a train and walked to the shop manager's house. At around 6:10 p.m., they rang the doorbell, posing as police officers. The woman who answered the door was the manager's wife, 65 years old at the time. She was supposed to be at work but had stayed home because of a cold. They punched her in the face and sprayed her with tear gas before forcing themselves in. They held her at knife point and restrained her with handcuffs and a gag. They robbed her of several million yen in cash, after which Katsumi strangled her to death. Case 4. I tried to find a term for this in English but couldn't, so it's a direct translation from Japanese. If anyone knows the proper term for this phase, please let me know in the comments. So, condolence theft is a method of targeting homes while the inhabitants are away at wakes or funerals. You can gather information from the obituaries in local newspapers. The two men used this method to repeatedly break into houses, stealing a total of tens of millions of yen. On January 20th, 2005, Tetsuo, then 65, and Katsumi, then 54, broke into the home of an unemployed elderly woman in Maebashi City who had gone to the wake of her deceased husband and stole 73 million yen in cash, about $714,000 in 2005 rates. However, the police were staking out the house and the two were finally caught red-handed. As a result, Katsumi was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months and Tetsuo was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In November and December of 2004, the police received tips regarding the Mabujimota murder case. After receiving information about the two, a follow-up investigation began. The police questioned them in September 2005. The Chiba District Court sentenced Tetsuo to death as requested by the prosecution. In his reasons for the verdict, the presiding judge said, "He shows no sign of humanity and his antisocial criminal tendencies are deeply rooted. In prison, which is supposed to be a place of rehabilitation, he did not deepen his remorse, but instead recruited new accomplices and, with a business magazine in hand, drew up plans for the crimes. After the 3 crimes, he continued to commit burglaries to make a living, and even after the crimes were discovered, he continued to deny them while detailing the crimes in a weekly magazine, making it difficult to find room for improvement or correction. All 3 crimes were carefully planned and selfish, with no consideration for the dignity of life, and there is no room for leniency." On March 22, 2007, his sentence was finalized and was incarcerated at Tokyo Detention House. Katsumi was also sentenced to death and is currently still in jail. In January 2017, Tetsuo complained of a sore throat and was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He did not want to undergo aggressive treatment and continued with painkillers, but he died of it around 10:30 p.m. on September 16th, 10 years after being handed the death sentence. He was 74 years old. Takeshige Hamada. Takeshige was a Japanese serial killer who, together with his wife and 2 accomplices, murdered 3 people over life insurance policies in Fukuoka from 1978 to 1979. On March 25, 1978, Takeshige and his 50-year-old wife went to her house in Shime, where she was living with a 28-year-old female relative. Depending on which sources used, they gave her either alcohol or sleeping pills, then dragged the woman to the bathtub, where they held her underwater until she drowned. The autopsy report erroneously determined the cause of death as heart failure, and the Hamadas became the beneficiaries of her life insurance policies, all of which amounted to 1.5 million yen, or about $8,500. Approximately 3 months later, on July 1st, Takeshige's wife was asked to watch over her 16-year-old son-in-law. At her suggestion, Takeshige made the teenager inhale paint thinner, and while he was unconscious, he took the boy to an agricultural waterway where he held him underwater until he drowned. The pair later claimed that the boy had died from an accidental fall owing to paint thinner poisoning and were awarded 10 million yen, about $56,500 from an insurance policy they had taken out on the victim. In 1979, Takeshige was approached by his former petty crime companion, let's call him A, and his 44-year-old friend, let's call him B, both of whom were rabid gamblers and struggling with debts. A informed Takeshige that he planned to insure one of his workers and subsequently kill him and asked him to aid in the murder, to which he agreed. On April 17th, the trio chose a 37-year-old with no known relatives whom they insured in a contract for 60 million yen, or $339,000. The man was known to be a heavy drinker, so they devised a plot to stage a hit and run while he was out wandering the streets. On the night of May 8th, all of them gathered at A's house and let the worker drink plenty of alcohol. They waited until he passed out, drove him out to a road behind Kyushu University in Fukuoka. Then, around 3 a.m. the next morning, after confirming that there was no traffic, Hamada laid him on the street, where he ran him over with B's truck. Before they could get the insurance money, however, the insurance company, feeling that the fee was too high, returned the premium to A and temporarily cancelled the contract. Takeshige and his associates were therefore unable to cash in on the murder, aside from a small amount of yen obtained from B, who had sold his truck immediately after the incident. Initially, the Fukuoka Prefectural Police truly believed that the man's death was accidental, but after examining the circumstances closely, including the fact that the victim's friends had taken out a large insurance policy, had been at his house, and that one of them, B, had told an acquaintance about a murder, all three were initially charged with various degrees of fraud, embezzlement, and counterfeiting. On October 4th, after more than a week of interrogations, all three confessed to killing the man and that they had planned to divide the insurance money. They were charged with murder, and authorities began to pay special attentions to Takeshige after learning that his wife's relative and son-in-law had died in similarly suspicious circumstances. On November 21st, Takeshige's wife was arrested on suspicion of forgery, but during the interrogation she admitted to killing her relative and her son-in-law in conjunction with her husband. Before she could be charged, however, she had to be hospitalized for treatment of an illness, but when the police came looking for her, they were informed that she had escaped in the early hours of October 25th. The wife traveled to Sasebo and remained hidden in the local area, but on the night of November 20th, she was tracked down to a friend's house where she was promptly arrested by investigators. In March 1980, amidst trial proceedings, she died from her illness aged 51. As a result, prosecution dismissed all charges against her. 2 years later, on March 29, 1982, the three defendants were found guilty by Justice Shigeomi Akiyoshi, and Takeshige was sentenced to death, while A and B were both sentenced to 15 years imprisonment as accomplices. B's sentence would later be reduced by 2 years. In the following years while on death row, Takeshige would unsuccessfully petition for a retrial twice but was rejected both times. He was sentenced to death for his crimes but died before he could be executed. At the time of his death, at the age of 90, he was the oldest convict on death row. Around midnight on June 26, 2017, a prison guard patrolling the death row inmates noticed that Takeshige was asleep with vomit everywhere. When medical personnel was brought in, they found that he was not breathing and quickly transported him to a nearby hospital in Fukuoka. There, he was kept on artificial ventilation and was given CPR by the hospital staff, but died 2 hours after his arrival. His cause of death was determined as asphyxiation, believed to have choked on his own vomit. Here we go again, guys. This guy died 35 years after he was sentenced to death. He was 90 years old. Many Japanese citizens are actually complaining that it takes way too long until their sentences are carried out, which I agree. There's also the hard cold truth that they are only told 24 hours before they're due to be executed to avoid suicide attempts. That means this man was waking up every day for 35 years wondering whether he'll get the notification of his impending doom that day. Do you believe this system is inhumane, or do you think they deserve to live with that kind of fear? If you're curious to know more about the Japanese capital punishment procedure, I've done a video on it, so please go take a look. I'll put the link at the end of the video as well as in the description box below. Masashi Daidoji. The Mitsubishi Heavy Industries bombing incident was one of a series of corporate bombings that occurred in Chiyoda Ward, Tokyo on August 30th, 1974. It was an indiscriminate bombing terrorist incident carried out by the far-left terrorist group East Asia Anti-Japanese Armed Front, WOLF, which they called Operation Diamond. The bombs that were planned to be used in Operation Rainbow were diverted, which I'll explain in a bit. They viewed Japan as completely evil before World War II and called the Pacific War a war of aggression. Based on this ideology, they concluded that Mitsubishi Heavy Industries was a company that supported everything they were against. The company supported Japan's heavy industry before and during the war and was a leading heavy industry manufacturer in Japan after the war. They were engaged in the defense industry and expanded globally, including Asia, Europe, and North America. Based on the group's political ideology, they targeted Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for its economic invasion of Asia. The East Asia Anti-Japanese Armed Front had failed in its plan to assassinate Emperor Showa, Operation Rainbow, on August 14, 1974. In frustration, they then decided to carry out Operation Diamond on September 1st. However, because it was a Sunday when many companies in the city were closed, it was moved up to Friday, August 30th. In addition, they bombed the Fuyuki Group statue and the Northern Culture Research Facility on October 23rd. On August 30th, at around 12:25 p.m., 4 from the group planted a time bomb next to a flower pot at the entrance on the first floor of the building. This was intended to destroy both the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Tokyo headquarters building and the Mitsubishi Electric building across the street. At around 12:42 p.m., the telephone operator at the building received a mysterious phone call saying, "We've set 2 time bombs on the road in front of your building. Anyone in the vicinity should evacuate immediately. This is not a joke." The time bomb exploded immediately after at 12:45 p.m. The impact of the explosion destroyed the first floor and the lobby, killing and injuring employees inside the building, and shrapnel rained down on the main street, killing and injuring many pedestrians. All the windows were shattered up to the 9th floor, and the windows of the surrounding buildings, including the Mitsubishi Electric building across the street, were also shattered. Vehicles parked on the road in front were also destroyed, and leaves were blown off from the trees along the street. The blast and scattered glass caused 8 deaths. 5 died instantly, 3 died after being taken to the hospital, including pedestrians who were not related to the company, and 376 injuries, making it Japan's worst terrorist bombing since the war. The damage was the largest until the Matsumoto sarin gas attack in 1994 and the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack in 1995 by Ohm Shinrikyo. The reason for this extensive damage was not only due to the large mass of the explosive, but also the fact that the blast, which normally spreads radially, was blocked by the valley between the buildings. So, it blew up the surface of the buildings, shattering all the windows with the shockwave of the blast, which then rained down on the road, and the broken glass became a secondary weapon. The shockwave that entered the building also traveled along the stairs and other structures and erupted from the windows, destroying the interior of the building. A hole 30 centimeters in diameter and 10 centimeters deep was also created at the center of the explosion. According to a survey by the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, the power of this explosion was more powerful than a 20-pound road destruction bomb used to stop enemy invasions. What exacerbated it even more was that even though the group called the business 3 times before it was set to go off, it was believed to be a prank. The phone operator hung up on them the first 2 times, and the bomb went off after the 3rd call when the operator finally decided to go up to the 8th floor to inform the General Affairs Manager's office, just in case. Apparently, the group hadn't expected such huge casualties, and in subsequent attacks reduced the power of the explosions, carried them out late at night, and made ample advance notice by phone. On May 19, 1975, some arrests were made for a separate bombing attack at the Korea Industrial Economic Research Institute. At the trial, the 2 leading men, Masashi Daidoji and Toshiaki Masunaga, claimed innocence of murder, saying, "We could not have predicted the destruction power of the bomb. We also made a warning call, so we had no intention of killing." In response, the prosecutor's office stated, "Even from an objective point of view, the bomb was placed in a busy area in broad daylight, and the type and location of the bomb was not specified even though a warning call was made. So it was impossible to evacuate the people in the building or on the street or to disable the bomb in a short time." It was clear that the act was intentional and the murder charge was established. the court found that the repurposing of a bomb intended to kill the emperor naturally applies to the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries bombing case. A phone call a few minutes before the explosion cannot be considered a warning, and if the bomb warning was not effective, no measures were taken to stop the time bomb, so the intention to detonate it remains unchanged. And on March 24, 1987, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentences of the two. This was the first time that a death sentence had been confirmed in a New Left case after the war. Shoji was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer that occurs in plasma cells, on April 2010. He died of the disease at 11:39 a.m. on May 24, 2017, aged 68. Akihiro Matsumoto. It all began when a woman, then 45, a former insurance saleswoman from Miyazaki Prefecture, plotted to kill her ex-husband, then 43, for the life insurance money. At the time, she was heavily in debt and asked a company executive in Miyazaki City to kill her ex-husband. The executive contacted the twin brothers Akihiro and Kazuhiro Matsumoto and Eiichi Shimura to do it. On December 1, 1994, the plan was carried out in Manila, Philippines. First, Kazuhiro gave Shigeru coffee laced with sleeping pills to put him to sleep, and Akihiro and Eiichi suffocated him to death by covering his face with saran wrap. By February 1995, Kayoko had defrauded the insurance company of a total of 72.93 million yen, or $732,000, and Akihiro and his men received a total of 13.5 million yen, or $135,500 as compensation. After that, the brothers were in financial difficulty as their business did not go well. They then decided to kill their acquaintance, Toshikazu Kagoi, then 47. On June 22, 1995, the three men had Toshikazu take out overseas travel insurance for 30 million yen, or $303,000, and then killed him in Manila. A local autopsy determined that Toshikazu had died of illness due to hemorrhage in the pancreas, but the insurance company withheld payment, so they were unable to collect the insurance money. In June 1995, the brothers had a dispute with a travel agency employee in Aichi Prefecture over the reservation of an airline ticket to the Philippines. The two men made false accusations and extorted 100,000 yen in cash and round-trip tickets to the Philippines for two people from the company. Approximately a year later, on May 23, 1996, the twins kidnapped the employee. They emptied the man's bank account and strangled him to death the next day and buried the body in the ground under the floor of a vacant villa. They were finally arrested on suspicion of blackmailing and fraud against the travel agent. The first trial was held at Nagoya District Court, and the three defendants, Akihiro Matsumoto, Kazuhiro Matsumoto, and Eiichi Shimura, showed a remorseful attitude, saying they would accept any sentence. On January 30, 2002, all three defendants were sentenced to death. Contrary to their words of "we will accept any sentence," the three defendants appealed, but the Supreme Court upheld the decision. Akihiro fell ill in January 2016 and was receiving treatment at Hachioji Medical Prison, but died of pneumonia just after 7:30 a.m. on January 22nd, aged 61. Kiyoshi Kataoka. On September 28, 2003, Kiyoshi, unemployed and 71 years old at the time, heard of a wealthy elderly person living alone in Tojo Town, Hiroshima Prefecture. He searched for the house but forgot the name and mistakenly entered the house where a woman A lived alone. A found him in her house, so he strangled her with his bare hands and fled. Hiroshima Prefectural Police questioned him twice at the time, but did not obtain a confession and did not file charges due to lack of evidence. The following year, on December 10th, Kiyoshi beat B, a soba restaurant owner in Ibara City, Okayama Prefecture, to death with a crowbar, stole 50,000 yen, or $490 in cash, and fled. 4 days later, he was arrested for driving without a license and confessed to the 2 murders. He initially admitted to his intent to kill during the investigation and the first trial. However, in the next trial, he changed his statement and denied any intention to kill anyone. The prosecution called for the death penalty, but presiding Judge Matsuno sentenced him to life imprisonment. In the appeal trial, the first trial verdict of robbery resulting in death was overturned, stating that the defendant changed his testimony to his own advantage and the testimony in the first trial lacked credibility, and the trial found the defendant guilty of robbery resulting in death and sentenced Kiyoshi to death. The defense's appeal was rejected by the Supreme Court, and Kiyoshi's death sentence was finalized. He was 70 years old at the time of the first murder in 2003, but was arrested at the age of 72 and was 79 years old when the death sentence was finalized in 2011. He is the oldest person to be sentenced to death at the age of 79 since the war. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in October 2008. On January 14, 2016, he lost consciousness due to aspiration pneumonia, which occurs when food or liquid is breathed into the airway or lungs instead of being swallowed, and was hospitalized. On the morning of February 14th, he died from an eating disorder and weakness associated with Alzheimer's disease. He was 84 years old. Fair warning guys, the next case is a long one and it was also mentioned in my video Top 45 Crimes That Shook Japan. It's much more in depth because I find it really interesting and didn't want to cut too much at this time, so make sure you have enough time left today to listen to the entire case. Here we go. Masaru Okunishi. On March 28, 1961, the general meeting of the Village Life Improvement Club, Minna no Kai, was held at the community center in Nabari City, Mie Prefecture. The club held regular meetings once a month, and at the end of the fiscal year, a general meeting and social gathering was held to close the year. The main focus of the general meeting was a banquet, and everyone shared the tasks of preparing food, alcohol, tableware, and setting up the venue, all while enjoying themselves. The general meeting began just after 7 p.m. First, the chairman gave the usual greeting, and the year's activities and income and expenditure report was given, followed by the election of the next year's board members. After the events were over, the long-awaited social gathering began. The women were looking forward to the wine served at the annual general meeting, but that year it wasn't on the menu because of a tight budget. However, on the day of the meeting, the chairman suddenly decided to purchase it with his own money, and the women were delighted with the wine that was prepared. "Last year was red, but this year it's white," one woman said excitedly. The men poured sake and the women poured wine into teacups, and the party began. It was an expensive wine, but some drank it all in one go, while others took a sip and saved the fun for later. Only 3 of the 20 women did not drink at all. After 4 or 5 minutes, when the atmosphere in the room had become lively, one woman complained of a sharp pain in her stomach. Many others stumbled when trying to sit down or were unable to stand up. The men began to tease them, asking if they were already drunk. Soon, symptoms that were more than just drunken stumbling began to occur, such as vomiting, cramps in the limbs, and loss of consciousness, and the men realized that something was wrong. The men hurriedly contacted a doctor and the police, but most of them were helpless and just panicked. The doctor said over the phone that it was probably acute alcohol poisoning or food poisoning, and the police also said the same thing. However, when they arrived at the scene, they realized at a glance that it was not that simple. The authorities arrived around 9:40 p.m., and by that time, some of the women were no longer moving. When the doctor examined them, he saw that those who were no longer breathing had dark brown complexions. He realized that it was the same symptoms as pesticide poisoning. What initially looked to be food poisoning was starting to look like something else entirely. The police called for reinforcements and requested the dispatch of a medical team. The medical team arrived just after 11 p.m. and confirmed the deaths of 5 people and about 7 other women who were seriously ill. The next morning, the scene was crowded with investigators and reporters. Since the symptoms were only seen in women who had drank the wine, it was clear that the wine was tainted. The investigation showed that someone had injected poison in the wine right after purchasing the bottle. Police identified 3 people who had touched the wine bottle and questioned them. The first was the chairman of the group and the one who had paid for the bottle of wine. His wife was one of the 5 people who had died the night before. He opened the bottle at his wife's request, but the crown was already missing, and he stated that he had only removed the cork. The second man questioned was the one that had purchased the wine and delivered it to Masaru's house. He stated that when the party started, he opened the crown with his teeth and threw it away nearby. When asked why he opened it, he said that it was because Chieko, Masaru's wife, had asked him to. The third was Masaru Okunishi, 35 at the time, and the husband of Chieko Okunishi. He stated that when he stopped by the chairman's house, he was asked to take the bottle to the venue. Apparently, he was the first one to arrive at the party. An autopsy was performed at 8:30 p.m. and it was determined that the poison was indeed a pesticide. Furthermore, on March 30th, it was discovered that the pesticide was tetraethyl pyrophosphate, or TEP for short, sold under the name Nikkarin tea. It is characterized as a colorless to amber liquid with a faint, fruity odor, and exposure occurs by inhalation, ingestion, or contact. Exposure to TEP can cause rapid, fatal organophosphate poisoning with headaches, sweating, nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, loss of coordination, and death. It was discovered that Masaru was the only person in the area who used this pesticide for work. And get this, it was also revealed that he was in a love triangle and he had told his wife Chieko to not drink that night. Thus he became the prime suspect. The fact that he was having an affair with a woman named Yasuko Kitaura, who also died from the wine poisoning, worked against him. At first, he denied the love triangle, but eventually admitted to it and told the detectives that his wife had threatened to kill Yasuko and then herself. The police determined that his wife Chieko was the mastermind behind it all and decided to search the house. However, she had a very good reputation, and everyone close to her described her as intelligent, sensible, and good-natured. Even Masaru's actual father said that he couldn't believe she could do something like this. The police rigorously questioned Masaru, and finally, just after 8 p.m. on April 2nd, he suddenly burst into tears and confessed that he had done it. The first trial took place at the Tsu District Court on June 16, 1961. In their closing arguments, the prosecution sought the death penalty while the defense argued for an acquittal. Defendant Masaru Okunishi maintained his denial, claiming that he had been coerced into confessing by the police. The presiding judge had several questions. The first was that Masaru, who had not known that wine would be brought to the party until the actual day, had stated that he had prepared the pesticide the night before. The second was the time that the wine arrived at the chairman's house. Initially, there was no contradiction in the testimony of the residents that it had arrived before 4 p.m. However, at a certain point, the testimony all changed to 5:10 p.m. This led to the conclusion that Masaru was the only one who could have poisoned the wine. If that was a lie and it had actually arrived before 4 p.m., there were other people within the residence, thereby increasing the pool of suspects. In addition, Masaru, his wife Chieko, and his mistress Yasuko were often seen out together and did not have a tense relationship. They worked at the same place and the 2 women went to work together. They took photos together and even went to the movies on their days off. There was no sense of any intention to settle the love triangle. On December 23, 1964, the trial, which had lasted 3.5 years and 18 hearings, reached its verdict. The presiding judge pronounced the defendant not guilty due to insufficient evidence. The reason given was that there were doubts about the credibility of the confession and the time of the crime as established by the prosecution. The judge believed that the villagers had changed their testimony because the police had led them to do so. 3 days later, the 2 district prosecutor's office appealed to the Nagoya High Court, citing a misunderstanding of the facts. The first hearing of the appeal was held on November 20th, 1965 at the Nagoya High Court. The trial lasted 15 hearings and took 4 years and 9 months. No clear physical evidence was presented in the appeal trial either. Therefore, the trial focused on the testimony of the villagers. For some reason, the testimony was different from that of the first trial and was all unfavorable to Masaru Okunishi. On September 10, 1969, at the sentence hearing, the judge overturned the original verdict and sentenced him to death. The teeth marks on the wine bottle's cap were determined to be Masaru's. This was the first death sentence for a person once found innocent since the war, and is the second case to date, making this an extremely unusual verdict. Masaru, of course, appealed the verdict. However, on June 15, 1972, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentence handed down by the second trial and dismissed the appeal. As a result, Masaru's death sentence was finalized. After this, he requested a retrial 8 times. Up until the 4th time, he had no support and was fighting the system all alone. However, one day in 1987, a man came to visit him. The man was a member of the National Rescue Association, and while investigating the case, became convinced that he was being falsely accused and offered to support him. After that, they filed a request for a retrial together, but it was rejected up to the 6th time. In April 2005, the 7th request for retrial was approved by the High Court. The examination proved that the poison used in the crime was not Nikkarin tea after all, and the decision was made to start a retrial. However, this was challenged by the Nagoya High Public Prosecutor's Office and was unfortunately overturned. This kept happening until 2012, when perhaps from depression and fatigue, Masaru fell ill with a fever and was transferred to Hachioji Medical Prison. He had spent 40 long years fighting for his right to be heard. Finally, in May 2014, the High Court easily rejected the 8th request for a retrial, and on October 4, 2015, during the 9th request, Masaru died at Hachioji Medical Prison. He was 89 years old. But his fight continued as his sister, Miyoko Oka, took over the fight. In March 2020, at the request of the High Court, the prosecution disclosed new evidence for the first time in about 15 years. According to this, at the trial, the death sentence was confirmed based on Masaru Okunishi's confession that on the day of the incident, when he removed the lid from the wine bottle before the participants arrived and put in the poison, the sealing paper broke. However, 3 eyewitness testimonies contradicts this. Furthermore, in October 2020, the defense team submitted the results of an analysis that found that glue components different from those used in the manufacturing process were found in the sealing paper. This means that it's possible that another person mixed in the poison and then put the seal back on. On November 30th, 2021, the defense team submitted new evidence yet again to the court. It was a letter of opinion indicating that the pesticide used in the incident may be different from Nikkarin tea that Masaru confessed to. According to the defense team, the records from that time stated that 9 of the 12 women who drank the wine said that it smelled like petroleum, but it was shown that Nikkarin tea did not have such an odor. Yet, as recent as this year, on January 29, 2024, the 10th retrial request by Masaru's sister, Miyoko, aged 94, was rejected. This will most likely be the last request due to her advanced age. In early May of 2015, Masaru got a high fever and was briefly in critical condition again in late August. He died of pneumonia at 12:19 p.m. on October 4th, 2015 at Hachioji Medical Prison, aged 89. So guys, let me know what you think of this case and whether or not you believe Masaru was innocent. I'm going to end the first part of this series here as it's already been quite a long one and I really want to hurry up and release this video. I hope you guys enjoyed part 1. Thank you so much for tuning in and let's continue the countdown next time. Cheers.